Hi everybody. I'm sorry about delaying our course Dip Your Toe in Code, but we've got a vacation coming up. I wanted to give you something to do. Take a look at this thermostat here. The top part is the set point. That's where I can change the dial and tell it what temperature I want things to be at. And the bottom part is the ambient temperature. That's how hot or cold it is in the room. You notice anything funny going on here? Now I can promise you I haven't touched this in 2 or 3 hours. Why do you see what you see? What could be going on? Well, maybe you've guessed it, that there's another heating source, one in the room with this thermostat and one in another room. And the hot air from that heating source is making its way into this room and heating the room up so that the ambient temperature is higher than the set point, even though that thermostat isn't affecting its heating source. The other thermostat, which is set to 68, is affecting that one, and that's heating the whole house, which might not be that efficient. Let's talk about how we can model systems like the system of a house heating. Lucidchart is my favorite program in the world because of all the things that you can do with it. Here are a few things that I've done with it in the past. I've diagrammed my curriculum. I've made a seating chart for our computer lab. I've made a data model for a role-playing game database. We've made wireframe diagrams for websites. We've made process diagrams for how people go through things. We've made sitemaps that show all the pages on websites. We've done mock-ups of game programs for how they're going to look once we actually code them. We've made mind maps, and we make a lot of flow charts. So in our class, Dip Your Toe in Code, you guys are going to be making flow charts. But the first thing I wanted you to do was to just get an account on Lucidchart and play around with it and make some stuff. Maybe stuff like we were talking about here. Maybe any other kind of thing that you might want to make. If you go to more templates, you'll see that there's a lot of templates that they already have designed for you. So when you go to Lucidchart, you'll have this sign up free button. And they'll give you a login screen like this. And you'll want to log in with your Google account. And they'll get you right here, but it's important to pick who you are so that you get the right number of free diagrams. So you definitely want to pick education. And I think it makes sense for you to pick educator because you will get more diagrams than if you pick student. Student will just give you 10 diagrams, but if you want to be honest, you can pick student and get your 10 diagrams. This is a diagram of a standard thermostat, and the main exciting part of a thermostat is this thing called a bimetal coil. You'll see that as you move the thermostat dial at the bottom, this mercury goes, and the mercury is a conductor of electricity, so it creates an electrical connection, and that spark is showing that connection being made or being broken. So the question is, well, one thing that moves this is that little switch on the bottom, but what's the other thing that moves them?
We actually have a bimetallic strip in around here that's coiled around, and then we have a capsule that has a mercury bubble in it right here. The mercury is a metal, so it will conduct electricity. And when the mercury is in that position, it's going to connect the two wires that are at the end, and it's going to turn on the furnace by closing the circuit. When it's over here, it's not going to do that. So when we want to turn the heat up, that means we turn it this way, and the mercury bubble goes in to connect the circuit. The bimetallic strip will eventually heat up and it will uncoil, and it will eventually turn like this. When it cools down again, it's going to slip back and turn the furnace back on again.
All right, so those two videos are clickable from these links, and you're going to have a link to this diagram that you can look at. This is an analog thermostat. There's no programming, there's no digital parts. It just keeps working as it works. Now imagine that you had a digital thermostat, and that's where this flow chart comes in. A digital thermostat is one in which it's electricity connected to a processor that has some logic in it that determine how things work rather than the mechanics of a strip coiling and uncoiling. So you set your set point, let's say it's 55 degrees and you want to start warming up the house, so you set it to 62. And your thermostat checks the set point and says, oh, I see, it's supposed to be 62. Checks the temperature, oh, I see that it's only 55 degrees. And it says, well, if the temperature is less than the set point, which it would be right now, we're going to turn on the furnace. And we'll check the set point. Well, it's still set to 62 like you had it before. Temperature is still 55, maybe it's 56 or 7. Or we're still going to have the furnace turned on. At a certain point, the furnace will have heated up the house. The set point will be 62, the house will be 63, and it'll say the temperature is not less than the set point, and it'll turn the furnace off. And it'll keep on checking. There's a lot more that goes on than just this. When you turn the furnace on, it takes a while before the air around the thermostat heats up enough for the thermostat to change its temperature. Because think about, your furnaces in the basement or your fireplaces in another room. Whatever method you're using to heat, they don't touch the thermostat instantly. So we have to wait until that happens. And similarly, once the thermostat turns the furnace off, the heat in the house is going to stay there. In fact, it might even continue to get a little hotter for a while. So this system isn't going to be instantaneous, and that's a good thing, because if it were instantaneous, the switch would keep on clicking on, clicking off, clicking on, clicking off, and you would wear out your switch. So what would we want to add to this to reflect more what's happening in your house? It's going to be different for different people. Well, I was thinking about that question, and I thought, okay, if the furnace is already on, then we don't have to go and turn it on again. So that's another decision point that we've put in our diagram. So here we only had one decision point which said, is the temperature less than the set point? And if it is, turn on the furnace. But here I'm saying, well, check to see if the furnace is in the on state. And if it is, we don't have to do something else. Because if we try to turn the furnace on and it doesn't turn on, and this is a digital system, we're going to want to set up some kind of warning about that. Anyway, say the furnace is already on. So now the furnace is heating. Radiant heating means heat is coming out of some place that's getting into the air. And then the air is getting hotter and it's circulating. And the currents of hot air are making their way to the room where your thermostat is, and then changing the bimetal strip in the thermostat or whatever measurement system you have to check the temperature. Then the system continues as it automatically would. Now, if you say, oh gosh, is the thermostat now higher as its ambient temperature than its set point? Well, we want to check, is the furnace disconnected? If it is disconnected, then heat is being conducted out of the system through the windows, through any of the places where your house gets colder. The furnace isn't disconnected, but let's go disconnect that. So heat transfers out, hot air escapes. If there is a window that isn't totally insulated, there'll be a cold air current coming from that window, and so these bits of cold air make their way over to where your thermostat is, and the ambient temperature goes down, and you then get an opportunity to say, oh gosh, now we need to turn the furnace on again. So if you compare these two diagrams, this one has 6 shapes in it. It models a great deal more of the system, but even this is a very simplistic model of a system. So one thing that you could choose to do would be to make a copy of this diagram with your lucid chart and talk to your folks, or maybe you know enough about heating already, and model how does your system work in your house. This will just give you some practice with thinking about how stuff works, making a conceptual model in your head, and then using a diagram to reflect that, which is similar to what people do when they're designing a program. They think, what happens, and then what happens, and when do you check to see whether we do this or that. So my fantasy would be that you make some flowchart about a system, but just play around with lucid chart and make anything. That would be good, because our first assignment when we actually begin this course is to make a flowchart about a program in lucid chart. Okay, good luck, have fun, and talk to you in a few.